All right, let's do this.
Let's do this. Evan Horowitz from Weed Club, a publicly traded company under Farmhouse Inc, connecting the whole cannabis industry globally. That sounds very big, but Evan's here to deliver on that promise. Welcome to Crazy Calm TV.
Thanks, Matt, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and Evan, likewise, here we are virtually connected. I got to ask you, it's obvious to me that you are a big fan of marijuana. Tell me about the first time that you partaked, smoking a joint, or how did it go down?
Well, there's two first times, okay? So I remember my first time when I first tried pot. It's such a dirty story. I can't believe you're asking me this to start this show. Okay. So I have a friend that I'm going to give you the real story. It's terrible. It's terrible. Mom, don't hold this against me, okay? So I was in the dorms at Berkeley. It was 1990. I had a friend who shall remain nameless that was going to school in a West Coast school. He was able to get bricks of terrible weed, like Mexican seeded, gross. They were gross.
Swag.
But my friend, swag beyond. Like if this pandemic was weed, it was that. Like seeded, but it was weed. And our friends would smoke it. I wasn't even smoking pot, but I identified an opportunity to potentially sell some pot in the dorm. And maybe that's why my co-founder at Weed Club, Michael, became so chummy with me. Was not to indicate anybody else in the story, but the idea was that we would get these bricks. And then so it was like between Christmas and New Year's, and it was like that Christmas break at UC Berkeley.
Right.
And I came back a little bit early from the East Coast. I went to go visit my family, and I was bored. So I tried some of my gross brick weed. I took a little puff alone in my dorm. I blew it out the window, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Why haven't I been doing this? This is awesome. And I realized right at that moment that was like good for me. It was like a healthy thing. It felt like I was ingesting a vitamin, and I had energized, and I'm like a neurotic inbred Jew from New Jersey. Like, this thing's needed, right? This is helping. And so I fell in love with weed, as a consumer at that moment. And then the second time that was my first time, was the first time I smoked with a parent. It wasn't my parent. So my co-founder, not to implicate anybody, and his mom were welcoming me down to Los Angeles for the first time. And we went to the first In-N-Out burger, and my friend's mom busted out a doobie, and she said, "Let's smoke, boys." And I was like, I didn't know what to say, because it was like weird. It's like, we hid this from the parents. And like, I would never tell my parents about this at that point. And yet my friend's mom was like, "No, I know you smoke. Go ahead and smoke. We're going to enjoy this. We're going to the first In-N-Out burger. This is a rite of passage." And so I remember both of those experiences very vividly.
Wow. And what is your favorite marijuana or stoner movie?
Wow. I love, there's so many of them that I love, Cheech and Chong, just because of how early on and how pioneering and genuine they are and were in their early movies. Like Up in Smoke is a classic movie. There's been so many movies. If Dave Chappelle is in it, then that's got to be on the list.
Half-Baked?
I mean, Half-Baked is classic. And these are movies that were made during, the bulk of Prohibition too. So yeah, there's a little bit extra sauce in those movies to have the chutzpah to produce these movies at those times.
So I'll share something funny. First time I smoked weed, I was at a friend's house. Parents weren't home. We hotboxed in a car and we watched the movie Half-Baked. Memorable experience. It's funny that you mentioned Prohibition, because it literally was Prohibition. But usually when you think Prohibition, you think of alcohol in the 1920s. almost 100 years ago, there is that stigma that still doesn't go away, and a fear among the people that is justifiable, right? You mentioned this in a Facebook Live a couple weeks ago, talking about how for privacy reasons, people do not even want to get a medical card. And that can restrict their access to cannabis in California.
It can affect a whole lot of civil rights, actually. You might not be able to get a job. You might not be able to get a gun. You might not be able, I'm not pro or anti, getting a gun, but what I'm saying is if a set of our population has rights to get a gun, then just because you consume medical cannabis should not prevent you from being able to get a gun. So yeah, there's still a great deal of stigmatism, and but that's also an opportunity for change. That stigmatism opens up the conversation. I've been sitting in some weird locales around the world, and people laughed at me when I talked about epilepsy and cannabis. They laughed. They said, "This is impossible." But no, it's totally possible. And so getting rid of that stigma is going to take a lot longer. There's still a great deal of misinformation, but as culture is more influenced by millennials and younger people, I think all of those paradigms are changing, and the sooner we can get governance into the millennials and younger people, the better, for a variety of reasons, especially cannabis legalization.
Yeah, the industry is ingrained with culture, and one of the biggest challenges is not just the regulation part, but changing the narrative and the perception of marijuana. And I mean, I guess that's interesting to me with Weed Club, that everything's out in the open. You're having pitch decks, people with marijuana companies. The stigma of someone like yourself, Evan, I mean, you went to Berkeley, you're an accomplished entrepreneur, but I mean, I think it's fair to say, I mean, you're a pothead. And I mean that in a good way, but there is this disconnect. It's like there's no issue with, oh, this person drinks a lot. They drink 4 to 5 times a week, but someone uses marijuana, which is, has never killed anyone. They're like, oh, that person's a pothead. I'm not going to take their business acumen seriously. And for someone like yourself, I'm not going to say that marijuana can't impair business acumen, but that is not true in your case. I mean, you're building a very big project right now.
Yeah, if anything, cannabis helps to inspire ideas. You just don't want to have high ideas. So you want to make sure you vet those ideas in a very sober manner later with your selection committees, your advisors, boards of directors, and in a very professional manner. But it's totally acceptable for us to smoke a joint and invent or something like that. But it might not be acceptable to smoke a joint and drive a school bus. So I understand that,
Sure.
there's limits on all of these freedoms.
Yeah, and so right there, for example, like you and I can come up to Berkeley hopefully soon, and we can smoke a joint and have a brainstorming session. Maybe some of the ideas, maybe none of the ideas will be good, but maybe we'll, a couple hours later, we'll have written them down, and hey, this idea works, right? And I think many people, not that you need to marijuana to be creative, but you have that option and that freedom. And I think that's a really important thing, and why a lot of people are magnetized to this plant, which does much more than creativity.
Yeah, it can be revealing. I'm kind of an outgoing person all the time, and so CBD makes me sort of inside myself, and THC makes me more expressive and creative. Bob Marley said that it reveals yourself to yourself, right?
Interesting.
Something to that effect. And so, yeah, it's, people like to drink for a similar reason, but, the effects aren't as healthful as having cannabis in moderation can be. On the other hand, an anesthesiologist told me an anecdote the other day about how he was administering anesthesia to a patient who was a dabber, 710, right? So we love all our potheads, dabbers, flat bill cap, and
what's 710? I've never heard that term.
710 is the term, like 420 is for smoking flowers, 710 is for smoking oils and dabbing and vaping.
Okay.
Concentrates. So we love all of our community, and the bigger of a pothead stoner you are, the probably more I will get along with you. And that's universal amongst a lot of the community, even if the person came from Goldman Sachs and was in charge of Goldman Sachs Asian Pacific, Pan-Pacific operations, and they started a cannabis fund. You could take a farmer from up on the hill who doesn't deal with people very often, who's most at home in their garden, and you can take this, business person from Goldman Sachs, and and our members at Weed Club, and all of us can get together. And it's the great uniter. We can all smoke a joint together, and it really does bring people together across all sort of types of backgrounds. But weed's the great uniter.
It's interesting. We talked about the cultural issues or challenges, I should say, the stigma to it, but I watched some of your pitch competitions, and the whole idea of, there's very sharp investors in the space, and investing when you're not exactly sure, there's a lot of uncertainty. Hey, THC right now cannot be shipped across state lines in general, right? There's this huge roadblock, enabling quote unquote export between states. I think you said it's necessary to ensure the supply chain stays intact during the pandemic. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I know alcohol is also regulated between states, but is there a chance for it to get kind of an open, you can sell in all 50 states THC? Is that a pipe dream? I mean, listen, legalizing marijuana when I was in college 10 years ago seemed like a pipe dream, and we're here now. So I'm curious what you think, being an expert in the field.
It's inevitable. And it's a great question. I don't think it's if we'll have interstate marijuana commerce or cannabis commerce or weed commerce or whatever everyone's favorite, ganja, daga, whatever you call it. So interstate commerce is coming. I would have expected it by now. We host a great deal of politicians at Weed Club so that our members and community can stay informed as to what's next. And I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we had Congressman Earl Blumenauer come to Weed Club's office and speak for our members. And he talked about creating an interstate commerce channeled from Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, and trying to create basically a Western corridor first to start this process, and then hoping that from there it would create a model that you could use to then demonstrate how you would connect other parts of the country. And it makes sense for a variety of supply chain reasons. Does it make sense to grow pot in a warehouse in a cold climate in Upper Michigan, when you could be growing closer to the equator with lower cost of production and being able to why are we paying so much for weed right now? It's out of proportion to how it should be. And so things need to change from a regulatory policy. And if we de-friction this import-export, you do create more jobs and more tax revenue. And the federal government, we know, is looking at this, and also the Republicans and Democrats and independents are all pretty much united on this as well. We get support from unusual places. We were surprised when Mitch McConnell related parties and lobbyists started contacting Weed Club to talk about how to help Kentucky farmers to move more of their CBD that they've now harvested. So it's a united front. And the key is that, you have an economic, health, social, and also within Weed Club, there's a huge social equity component too. So you'll notice in our events, there's always a cause, and the cause will be related to some sort of civil rights or justice or helping patients and helping all small businesses to compete with the big dogs, right? Because the industry's really been, all right, perfect example. North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota. If you need weed in Fargo, North Dakota, there's one dispensary. It's owned by Acreage Holdings, John Boehner, right? They raised who knows how much money.
Right.
And then next thing you know, they decided to close it. There's only 6 or 7 shops in all of North Dakota. Now, granted, North Dakota is not the most populous place on earth, but people in the Fargo is a major city. Everyone knows Fargo. There's been
Sure.
TV shows named after it. So if you're a patient in Fargo and you are treating some issue with cannabis, you now have a struggle to get cannabis. However, if that same shop was owned by a local person who was an entrepreneur who wanted to be a dispensary owner their whole life, they always dreamt of it. There's thousands of people that have dreamt of it. Well, we've actually helped some people to actually do it. And when you do it that way and you spread out who owns it, how many owners, where are they, the diversity of the supply chain and the vendors too. So Apothecarium is a famous brand of dispensary. You know, if you look at their inventory, it's clear that they like to work with reliable, bigger suppliers. There's not a lot of curation of smaller suppliers within it. You know, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong out there. You know, it's a great store. It's a leading store. But there's other stores too, where if you have this local myopic view of sourcing from your best craft farmers and things like that, and having diverse startup founded products entering your shelves to test these products with your communities at these different dispensaries and delivery services that are dealing with the customer directly in cannabis, well, you know, lots of more good things happen than when you have John Boehner owning your local dispensary and standing there smoking a cigarette in front of it.
Yeah, like conceptually, it's like you have to open this industry up, allow freedom between states, between countries, and that's better for everyone. If I'm in, you know, the state of Kentucky, or for example, and you know, I do want to buy local, there's always these causes for local, but maybe I'm saying, hey, listen, look what I'm getting from California. I can show that to local growers, say, this is what you're competing with. They can see that, and then they can modify their strands and get better, right? That's how we'll serve the public better and also allow for more inclusion. I mean, I think that's a huge thing, and I'm very optimistic coming from your mouth that you think there's a lot of support in Congress, because I thought it was kind of, I wasn't so optimistic on that, but you're definitely in the know. And I mean, what does it feel like? Did you pinch yourself the first time, like a legislator, a congressman or woman reached out to you for your advice?
I never thought of that. I just thought it was a normal, being weed club, it just feels like being weed club now. Sure. But to think back to the first time, yeah, it was a rite of passage. It was a validation. It was a manifestation that our community was here, that we had gone beyond this conceptual idea stage to a vibrant, thriving, growing community that's actually building like an ecosystem that's solving a problem in the supply chain, especially. So the other time that comes to mind to extend on this question a little bit is that Michael and I, my co-founder, he's also our lead engineer and he's an attorney. But he's
always a nice tool for your toolkit, having a law degree.
Yeah, he's a great co-founder. He's very details oriented, you know, too, which is helpful for us. And we went down to go see Ian Rice at SC Labs in Santa Cruz. And SC Labs is one of the longest running laboratories that tests cannabis in California. And we had asked them, we met them at like a hemp con when we first launched. And we said, hey, can we come down and just get like, just brain drain you guys for a few hours so we can understand this. And when we met them and started talking to them at HempCon and we had a session with them, we liked them, they were fun, but we also realized that they were about science. They were truly professional about science, everything. One of their lead lab partners in Santa Cruz, they poached from Samsung, and he worked on the team that created the shatterproof cell phone glass. Like, they're real scientists, you know?
Yeah.
And, they sat us down for about 2.5 hours. On the way down there, we stopped and picked up a cherry pie, and we brought them a fresh cherry pie. We thought that was funny because there's a strain called cherry pie, so we figured we'd show up with a cherry pie. But lo and behold, after 2.5 hours, we downloaded all this information about the chemistry of the plant and the science of testing and the genome and terpenes and all this stuff we had no idea about. Weed was weed at that point. You know, we were really just coming into the understanding that this was a whole science here. And so we left there, we drove up the Pacific Coast Highway. We stopped at this beautiful spot in Santa Cruz. We smoked a joint and we looked at each other and we were like, we're here because SC Labs had taken the time to educate us. And now we knew that we went beyond being these amateurs that thought we were experts, but now we were actually starting to scratch the surface of true knowledge. And the next thing I did was to start to shadow people in the industry that were truly engaged in the supply chain. And I saw some crazy shit in that process.
So I love that turning pro movement, or moment, I should say, the turning pro moment. So, all right, you saw some crazy shit. Share, what happened? What'd you see?
Yeah, so, because of prohibition, there's like, we saw a variety of crazy stuff early on because there was no governance really to point to. You couldn't go to, the first crazy shit we started hearing about was actually what the police and the sheriffs were doing to our members. So our members would tell us stories of trying to move inventory from Northern California to the biggest market on earth, Southern California, and that they would have to come through this bottleneck on the 101 freeway through Rohnert Park. And Rohnert Park sheriffs were extorting all of the farmers as they were coming through this one little bottleneck, and there was no way around this bottleneck really. And so the Rohnert Park sheriffs would pull you over, they would put your hands on the car, they would take out your weed, your oil, your money, and they would just stand there and talk to the farmer, talk to the logistics person for 45 minutes to an hour, saying things like, how are you going to learn a lesson if you leave here today and you still have your marijuana, your money, and you haven't learned a lesson? And they would just keep talking to the farmers, hoping that the farmers would break and say, why don't you keep the money? And they eventually got sued. And now Rohnert Park had to fire these sheriffs, and they're paying out settlement money. They've paid out millions of dollars of settlement money to cannabis collectives that were medical collectives that have now proven that they were operating properly. And so it was the sheriffs that were shaking and extorting people.
Wow.
We had other incidents where people had a store they said was a store. It would be advertised on known places, but it was a front. It wasn't a legitimate store, and they were there to try and jack people. There were other instances. Yeah.
So you'd walk in like looking to buy pot and you get robbed.
They were targeting the supply chain, so they would try to use any sources of finding professionals, trick them into thinking they had a brick and mortar
dispensary.
And then right. And so you have to be very careful. Weed Club, fortunately for us as a connector, we've been able to sail through that medical collective period, because it's really when you start track and trace and you put in the statewide regulation that you actually start to mitigate the unregulated markets. And so the unregulated market was actually a healthy endeavor because you have patients getting marijuana, you have genetics getting preserved, but it's untenable when you have cartels running the show because they might not be rational. Like, they don't make a rational decision when they're mediating a dispute amongst cartels, And so we just wanted to stay as far away from that as we could. And when we first started Weed Club, I was lucky to sit down with Seth Godin, who's a marketer. Seth's blog, and he was the founder of Squidoo. And he came to our office, which is Runway in the Twitter building, and we have an igloo. And so we sat down in our igloo, and Seth was talking about how you had to be ready to excommunicate from your community. If you wanted to be a community, you couldn't just welcome everybody. You had to excommunicate people at times if they didn't perform by the expectation of the community. If the ethos of the community was to be on time for a meeting and you were late, you should be excommunicated. If you were a cartel, you should automatically be excommunicated. And so Weed Club's always had this philosophy of vetting its members. And so the community realized this was a safe platform, and thus they went to go exploit other platforms. So some of the bad stuff we saw were just really trying to mediate long-running disputes that have been going on for years. where a shipment got lost and original co-founders are now, accusing each other of some sort of theft or something. But we all have to work together. All of that stuff needs to be put on the side, because if the pioneers of the industry want to make the leap into the next phase of the industry, you have to have a clean slate, and you have to leverage that old experience for something positive and have interconnectivity. And so, yeah, we're glad to have mediated some of those. And the jackings, the thefts, and all of that stuff, they went down drastically, anecdotally, amongst the members once you put in policies that, like, one, protect them from these sheriffs that steal from them in Fresno and Rohnert Park and these known places that are hot spots for that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I can see it, that I've seen it, and I still see it a lot in the cryptocurrency community and just emerging industries where there's a lot of regulatory issues, and maybe when there's not, but there tends to be a lot of infighting within the community as it grows. I think that's human nature, and it's going to happen to some extent, so I don't want to demonize that, but that is a really important thing, keeping the community healthy, which is another reason why I admire Weed Club. And listeners, this is not this is not a paid interview. I'm just a fan, so I just want people to know that. But of course, do your own research, go to weedclub.com, check them out, and really, I would say, decide for yourself. But I wanted, you mentioned money and issues with money, and that causes a lot of problems, but not just the money, like, hey, you and I started a business, Evan, and I feel like I deserve more, but hey, I have to carry around cash. My banks won't accept me. My payment processor is charging me 5%. These are real issues that the cannabis industry has to deal with. I mean, what's the outlook right now? And of course, if you have any cool anecdotes, we'd love to hear them as well.
Yeah, so historically, big issue has been working capital. There's been a shortage of working capital for all cannabis companies. And you see the stories of Caliva and Ease and all of them struggling to raise these massive tranches of capital in emergency conditions. And so, what we used to see and are still seeing some of are these predatory lenders that they're operating within the regulations of what's acceptable. However, the terms, like you said, like processing could be 7 or 8% with a 10% reserve, with a holdback, with some weird, you have to pay $500,000 up front, put it in an account against chargebacks, a million hoops to jump through.
And a monthly fee, and you may have to have we got offered, but you have to have a business in Belgium, register in the EU. And we're we're just trying to take credit cards. This is crazy.
Yeah, so it's an unfortunate thing, but what we are starting to see are institutions that are entering the space. They're putting their toe in the water. So a bank came to us and they said, we want 10 accounts. We only want $200,000 in deposits from each of these 10 accounts. Please help us, find these 10 accounts. And we could find those 10 accounts in 10 seconds. Okay, that was easy. And so next for that bank is they onboard those accounts, they report to FINRA and FinCEN and every body there is to report to, and then they wait to hear back to see if any flack comes in. And if no flack comes in, they intend to start onboarding more accounts. And there's a network, a patchwork of banks that are doing a similar thing. So as more institutions come in, they'll be charging much higher rates than they're used to charging, and they'll still be dramatically below the state, the previous normal fees. So there's origination fees on debt in cannabis fundraising. So we've helped to raise more than $10 million in the past 9 months. And so I've seen different debt instruments, equity instruments, and interest rates were on that debt, they were between 12 and 14%. Now I think you're looking at anywhere from 18%. We saw a hard money request where the quote was over 20%, and they're applying for that and putting up real estate collateral to get more working capital for a distributor that needs to buy inventory. And so investors have a huge opportunity. If I'm an investor and my portfolio is weighted in travel and cruise ships and some other things that are going to take time to rebound, if ever, I would look at some of these industries that are poised for explosive growth, like cannabis, blockchain based businesses, security, transparency, authentication, identity verification, things that will enable more contactless society for a little while, and at least until we have a solution to the current problem. My other big solution, I'm a big fan of Jeremy Gardner. Jeremy and I,
Yeah.
he's a very inclusive person. He invites me to his parties at the Crypto Castle in San Francisco.
And listeners, let me just give a background on, so Jeremy is, he was a co-founder of Augur and venture capital, early guy in Bitcoin, really interesting person. But for those that don't know him, but keep going.
Yeah, and so Jeremy made a post on Instagram the other day where he was saying that it's time to hand over society basically to millennials right now and young people, because they're more immune to this contagion. And so this is a great time to hand over the reins. He's ready to go back to work. His whole community is ready to go back to work. It's you old people that need to sequester. We'll take care of this. I agree. I'm ready to do that from a governance with our entire government and everything, like having transparency, having a blockchain mentality of immutability and being true to your word, and replacing like intermediaries. Those are all things that help society for the long haul. It's not being socialist at all. It's actually being democratic.
Let me add some context here. So there was actually, I don't know if you saw this, there was some, in Kern County, I guess near Bakersfield, there were some physicians that put their opinion and did a Q&A with people that had dissenting opinions. It was a great discussion on YouTube. Elon Musk tweeted it. It got taken down by YouTube a few days ago because, subjectively it didn't, and it was pure censorship, right? And anyway, it got reposted on something called Liability TV, which is a kind of a decentralized, libertarian type YouTube site, and I'll link to it. But it's very relevant because what we're talking about, I have no idea if those will be considered controversial. I invite guests on that are working to push regulation. And so I'm going to start putting our videos. I mean, this will first go live on YouTube, and it by far has the biggest reach, but also start putting these on Library because of that. So I love that idea. Like, hey, we need to decentralize, right? It kind of, freedom of information, and as well as like the payments and the money part of crypto. I'm hoping to see a more cooperation, not I would say cooperation, but more synergy and more open discussion between the cryptocurrency community and the cannabis industry, which right now they seem overall pretty far away, but maybe they're open to it, but there's a lack of education and so forth.
There's a root problem, and what you have are card associations that are trying to basically monopolize their positioning right now.
Like credit card and payment processing, correct?
Right, and so what they've done in relation to cryptocurrency specifically is to put the industry on notice through trade shows, speaking engagements, and blog posts, and putting the word out to the community. If you engage in some sort of e-wallet, they've covered a range of solutions that would typically be cryptocurrency and e-wallets and things like that. And if you do those, you can go on the TMF file, terminated merchant file, forever, that we will not, when we do accept Visa, MasterCard in this economy of cannabis, you who use cryptocurrency and e-wallets and anything that's outside of the policies that we've explained to you now, these self-serving policies that inhibit competition,
right?
Well, we're not gonna let you in. So it scares the hell out of the point of sale gatekeepers, because they recognize the explosive nature of what happens when consumers, they see it now, because when you accept a credit card, your average order goes from, in San Francisco, credit cards are the difference between a $68 and $130 order. So it's a massive difference. You're getting the same number of orders with a higher throughput. So, but again, these are all the opportunities. So if you're a bank and you're out there right now and you're like, hey, we can do the reporting here. There's the Cole memorandum, like this, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle here. We're going forward, hey, you have a huge opportunity. Weed Club, we would like to partner with more banks and help to solve this problem. And we would like to disintermediate some of these predatory lenders who we appreciate. They funded our members, and the members benefited from that, and they benefited from that. But the cost of capital and the cost of processing and services ought to be in line with traditional mainstream business. And consider insurance. Like a crop loss with marijuana was never paid up until very recently. They've started to word these agricultural crop loss policies a little bit more favorable for cannabis operators. So things are going to improve. They're going to keep improving. Our community is going to make sure of that. And so is the whole industry. There's a lot of people pushing Weed Club. This is a big industry. So Weed Club's not trying to be the only one at anything.
Right.
Nobody needs the only one at anything. If you're a presenter in a pitch competition and you're concerned that you are going to pitch against another business in your sector, you are not a good founder if you're worried about that. We ought to be able to create a categorical pitch where it's the drink pitch, it's the lab pitch, it's the dispensary pitch. And we ought to be able to start seeing that sort of working together more and more. We still haven't seen that completely yet.
So I want to add something. For anyone that has never started a marijuana business would never know this, but for us, we are a CBD coffee company, and I still import organic produce from South America to this day, and there's something called liability insurance that a lot of distributors and retailers require. So for the fruit business, again, this is not it's not controversial. It's just a healthy fruit. It's cost around $650 a year. From the same insurance company, and looking around the quotes for a CBD business, you're talking $3,500 to $5,000 a year. 7 times, or more than 7 times the price for the same insurance. So it's very expensive, and that cost gets passed down to the end consumer. It's a huge issue, and we could go on. We could do a whole podcast, and maybe we will in the future, on all of the banking and money related issues in the cannabis space.
Yeah, as even you guys too with your brands, if you guys run into issues like that on our platform, there's always somebody we can connect you with to help solve that problem immediately, like for real solve it. So if it's agricultural insurance, there is an expert on our platform. His name is Seth, and he's got his partner named Marshall. And these guys have done cold storage. They've done logistics for artichoke, strawberries, and now cannabis. They started in like Salinas and Gilroy area, Hollister in California, which is a massive agricultural area. And so we're able to identify legit service providers that they're not an insurance company that's identified weed as like a place to make money. They're genuinely concerned about how this policy is written, whether or not the policy, is going to get paid on when it's necessary to pay it, and whether there's any language about federal this and that and your real estate that would make that moot. They remove all of that stuff. And so if you don't do that, you're going to pay 3 times more for less coverage and less service. So Weed Club is here to help, and anything where you have a group and you're buying something, if it's insurance, accounting, legal, Weed Club has resources and ways to help you in your business.
Wow. Well, listen, Evan, it's been amazing having you on. I'd like, if you're open to it, I'd like to have you on, a couple of times a year to give us an update, because it's man, there's just so much going on, and industry changes so much. I think that we have to ask this question, right? The pre and post Corona, it's a new epic. That's going to affect the industry as well. I saw something this morning. I'm on the Marijuana Moment newsletter, and the governor, I believe, of New Mexico, I said that I wish we would have gotten marijuana legalized pre-Corona. And so that was really interesting for someone to say that. And so, I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it's going to be a lot of ups and downs. But yeah, it's really good to know that someone like you, and most importantly, the Weed Clubs, exists.
Thank you. And we feel a sense of responsibility, when we wake up every day, 7 days a week, there's activity on our platform to, this is a ongoing mission. And we want to undo the damage that prohibition did on our industry. We want to build that ecosystem that will connect the dots so we could have a reliable, stable, scalable, economic opportunity with civil rights opportunity embedded in it for everyone, and small business opportunity as well. So, pre-coronavirus, we really felt like we had to be together in person in order to connect these dots, that the investor had to see the business founder in person before they would stroke a check.
Mhm.
The dispensary owner had to meet the vendor before they would stock that edible. But I think everyone's figured it out. Like, you have to keep your business moving forward. We're an essential business. There's actually more demand now than ever. And so they're adjusting. And so mid-coronavirus, you see the industry making hand sanitizer for local jurisdictions. You see them repurposing assets, and then you see them still providing the cannabis, but there's more of a weight towards delivery today. And delivery is now taking off. And so I think post-coronavirus, there might be an issue for brick and mortar retail that doesn't include some pre-order with curbside and delivery component to it. I think that we're being trained all of a sudden, to do delivery, like DoorDash and Caviar and all these services have been exploding, Grubhubs and all of that. But it's now happening in cannabis too. And so on Saturday, I realized I was down to my last nug. I haven't run out of weed in a very long time. I was like down to my last nug. I went on to my favorite dispensary's website. I placed an order. 42 minutes, let's say. It was 40 minutes later. My delivery arrived. I had a half ounce of San Fernando Valley Kush, in my hands. I had a tincture, and I also had a sativa, because when I run, I like to smoke a sativa before I run. My favorite combo is coffee, sativa, and like a 5-mile or 6-mile run in Twin Peaks in San Francisco. That's the ultimate high for me. And then like a big hug from my family, you can't beat that. And then like a message from our community that they just signed, some deal that they sourced through the community. And I live for that every day. And, but yet I have to remember I'm like a business too, right? So we're monetizing Weed Club, and we are a public company at Farmhouse, FMHS. And, our goal is to be the most transparent company in the space. And so I think transparency in the post-corona, here's an example. You're a dispensary owner. You're used to customers coming into your shop. They sniff samples, they look at things. Now they're not looking at things. What are they going to look at? Well, they could look at the lab test results. So Weed Club's working double time right now to come up with an efficient way to use machine learning and AI to import all of those disparate lab test results that come in like 30 different formats from 30 different providers to make them uniform, because our members need that in order to sell more, because customers are now buying off of these lab tests. People are going to become experts in terpenes, the flavor compounds of cannabis, because what people like are the effects and the flavors of those terpenes combined with the other cannabinoids. You'll start to see rare cannabinoids taking off now too, like THCV, CBN, CBG, that have specific effects for specific things. And so I'm excited about the post-corona thing too, because you have a validation that just happened. It's a shift. It's a true paradigm shift. You're essential. You've been deemed essential. It's not that we're potheads saying we're essential. Look at us. It's everyone saying we're essential, from the government on down. So I look forward to great things from our community for innovation. There's tons of innovation that will extend over to other types of crops. So in our next pitch event, actually in 2 pitch events from now, we have 2 more booked coming up in the next month. And there'll be these 3 company pitch events with 3 panelists. There'll be 1-hour events. And there's a Washington State professor in it who's engineered a better hemp seed that's more stable and reliable. Wow. And that's an innovation that's going to it's going to lower the price of CBD right away. Because farmers today we're paying like $1 a seed. This entity, their cost is like less than 3 cents a seed to make it the seed. So all of these places where people thought that the cannabis entrepreneur was like a blank check, an ATM machine, whether it was for taxes or to charge us more, as that changes, things will come into balance. And this was worth it. This ripping the Band-Aid and all this stuff was worth it. And the coronavirus just basically fully exposed what the cannabis industry is. And that is, it's here to stay. And it's a place for the best entrepreneurs with the most innovation, with a health benefit. Nobody dies. And when you cut out cartels, even Mexico's figured this out, right? They've had more of a cartel problem than anyone, as much as anyone, all through Latin America and Central America. And Mexico right now has legalized weed, and they want it to be out of the cartel's hands. They realize what a big difference that is to society. They're telling the cartels, you know, keep your hands off. And then you have a movement of farmers that are agreeing that they're refusing to sell to cartels. And as this happens throughout the world, those prices are going to come down.
For sure.
And the taxes will come down, and jobs will continue to increase. Look at all this vacant real estate. That could be a grow, that could be a processor, that could be a distributor, that could be a dispensary, that could be a laboratory. Let's repurpose all this empty real estate for cannabis.
Yeah. Evan, that was an excellent kind of send-off speech there. Just anyone listening to that, all the opportunities that are here. It's immense. Thank you so much. You know, weedclub.com, Twitter @420. What a great Twitter handle. And Evan, I hope to have you on back soon. Thank you so much.
Matt, thanks a lot.